We have, we must have always a supernatural vision, because the church is not a political party and not an NGO. It is the mystical body of Christ. And Christ is really the head of the church. The Pope is only his vicar and the visible head. And so the church is always in the hands of God. We have to renew this faith and this our conviction. In spite of so many difficulties, the church already passed in the 2000 years so many critical situations, especially the Holy See and the popes, the papacy. We know the so-called Dark Ages. They were called Dark Ages exactly because of the confusion and the misery, moral misery, which passed the papacy in the 10th century, beginning of the 11th, because at that time, the papal chair was mostly in the hands of some criminal groups and families of Rome. And they occupied with their sometimes corrupted sons the papal chair. And the church survived. And at the same time, and then the second great time of crisis of the papacy, of the papal chair, were the so-called Renaissance popes in the end of the 15th, beginning of the 16th century, which really brought a huge damage for the moral authority of the papacy. And so, but nevertheless, the church survived, and in that times of such a deep crisis of the papacy, divine providence gave to the church a new spiritual strength in the little ones, in those who are not members of the high clergy. For example, during the so-called dark times in the 10th century, they started the great movement of the Cluny Abbey, which really was a renewal of the church with very serious spiritual program, renewal. And from these Cluny monks, they came out after the crisis, or the end of the crisis, even popes. The most famous was Gregory VII, Saint Gregory VII. He was a monk of Cluny, and he, with the other helpers of him, cardinals and bishops, really brought a true renewal of the church. Therefore, it is called in history the so-called Gregorian reform in the 11th century of the liturgy, of the life of the clergy, and of the papacy itself. And in the Renaissance time, there were many simple saints, lay people who later were canonized. They worked quietly, prayed, and sacrificed themselves for the renewal of the church. And then the renewal came with the Council of Trent. And so, therefore, we have not to despair and not to have two human considerations. God will provide us also good popes. Of course, we have to do also something, not simply looking and sitting there quietly, but we have to pray very much, intensely, that God may grant to his church in our day even, not in 100 years, in our day, again, holy popes, strong popes, 100% Catholic popes. And this we must implore. with our prayers, confident prayers, not only with prayers, maybe also with some sacrifices to offer to the Lord, and make a chain, this true chain of prayers and sacrifices to implore God to free the Holy See from these crises in which it is. So therefore, as Christians and Catholics, we continue with hope and with this supernatural vision that the Church is, in spite of all, in the almighty hands of God.